it doesn't make any sense unless you come to the understanding, you accept the fact that Trump is a puppet and that his administration is supposed to be attached to this fraudulent economy, and that when it collapses, Trump, and by extension all his supporters, are meant to take the blame for that crash.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special interview. Today we have a first-time guest to the show, Brandon Smith. Brandon runs altmarket.com. That's alt-market.com. And I got to tell you, if you are prepper-oriented, survivalist-oriented, if you have an interest in gold and silver, or if you want to know how the markets or politics really works behind the scenes, you really got to check out alt-market.com and see what it has to offer. Join one of his groups. And he is a true truth teller and a freedom fighter. Brandon, I'd like to welcome you to Silver Doctors.
Hey, thanks very much for having me on the show.
Now, Brandon, let's just jump straight into it. I know this is going to be a difficult interview for some people to hear. I come from the opinion that President Trump is deep state in patriots' clothing, much the same way that people talk about a wolf in sheep's clothing. I think that people are selected and that they're not elected because I think our election system has become totally corrupt. And I do think that there is a plan to take down the United States economy. Part of that being bringing economic, ruin, financial misery to the masses. So starting right off there, what are your initial assessments and opinions of President Trump? And additionally, I'd like you to talk about your controlled demolition of the economy that you predict is coming.
Well, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, my initial opinion of him was I was going to wait and see. During the elections and his campaign, I was aware of the fact that he had been bailed out of his debts in his multiple properties, including his Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City, by the Rothschild family, or the Rothschild banking syndicate, specifically by their agent Wilbur Ross. Wilbur Ross was an agent for the Rothschild Bank, and he set up the bailout of Trump during the 1990s when Trump was basically on a major downslide, and he probably could have gone completely bankrupt at that point. However, his fortune and his image was saved in the 1990s by the Rothschilds. I was aware of this. However, I had not seen quite yet in his behavior if he was going to be a puppet for the Rothschilds, or if he just had a banking relationship with them in the 90s. As soon as he entered the White House, my opinion changed pretty quickly and drastically as far as waiting and seeing. Really quick, he started to do things like add Goldman Sachs banking people, former Goldman Sachs people, into his cabinet. He immediately added Wilbur Ross as his commerce secretary into his cabinet. Wilbur Ross still being a Rothschild banking agent. And then, of course, later on, we saw that he added Bolton and Pompeo, both neocon warmongers. We're all aware of their sort of insanity. All these banking elites, CFR agents, all of these guys added into Trump's cabinet after he had campaigned for months, saying that he was going to, quote, drain the swamp. When he was talking about draining the swamp, I'm pretty sure he meant getting rid of Goldman Sachs bankers, CFR agents, and globalists from the White House specifically and Washington, D.C. as a whole. However, he expanded the swamp as soon as he got into office. So it was clear to me at that point that he was a puppet, that he was a control puppet, and that the whole election was a facade. This whole idea that Hillary Clinton was the devil incarnate, and we have to elect anyone but Hillary, and Trump is the guy, Trump's our guy. he's a hero, he's anti-SJW, he's anti-globalist, he's going to save us. It was all an act, because as soon as he got in, guess who he added right into the White House? The same people he said he was going to get rid of. So there was that, and then his observations during his campaign on the economy were, relatively spot on. There was some, it seemed like he was holding back on some things, but I thought that he was relatively spot on. For example, during his campaign, he argued that the entire economy, which was supposedly in recovery under Obama, he argued that that was a bubble created by the Federal Reserve, using ultra low interest rates and stimulus, and that bubble would one day pop or collapse. He called it a big bubble. As soon as he got in the White House, he started attaching his entire presidency to the stock market and to the economic bubble, or what we call the everything bubble nowadays. So he immediately went from, the Fed created this massive bubble and it's going to pop, to, hey, I'm the guy that's making the economy great. Look at how great the stock market is doing. It doesn't make any sense unless you come to the understanding, you accept the fact that Trump is a puppet and that his administration is supposed to be attached to this fraudulent economy, and that when it collapses, Trump, and by extension all his supporters, are meant to take the blame for that crash.
I would agree with what you said there. I was also taking a wait and see approach. I gave up watching sports and television and movies in the early 2000s. So I actually wasn't even aware he was doing the WWE stuff until I read one of your articles. I was aware of his Apprentice show, although I've never seen it. So, I wasn't sure exactly where all the popularity came from, other than the pop culture aspect of it. But I would say that yes, he did say all the right things in the campaign, especially as it pertains to the economy. Now, one of the things that I would like to say is, I don't think that you can make America great again before you drain the swamp. So that was the very first thing that caught me off, kind of like the way that you were referring to, bringing in people from Goldman Sachs and warmongers and what like. So, would you agree with that it is impossible to make America great again before you drain the swamp? The swamp has to be drained first. So that's the first question. And then the second question is, they're doing a pretty good job with the back and forth, the supposed quarrel between, President Trump and the Fed and Jerome Powell. So could you just talk about that dynamic, how it might be a little bit of theatrics going on there, Brandon?
Well, on the first question, I guess yes, absolutely. You cannot fix the corrupt system without removing the corrupting influence first. There's no way. You can't. It's like giving a person with cancer aspirin. It's not going to help. You have to remove the cancer from their system. The globalists, or the global elites, or the banking elites, they are a cancer within the system, and they will perpetually corrupt that system no matter what we do, no matter what legislation we pass or how we sort of switch around government or the politicians in government. They're always behind the scenes corrupting that system. So there's nothing we can do until they are removed. And the fact that Trump has gone in the opposite direction from what he said he would do during his campaign, and expanded the swamp instead of draining it, that tells me that he is a Pied Piper for conservatives particularly, and a puppet of that banking elite system. And he's only going to perpetuate that corruption. He's not going to take away from it. You have to remove the banking elites first. As to the sort of WWE, WWF battle, the fake wrestling battle between Trump and the Fed and Powell, first of all, I think it's interesting the narrative that's being put forward, not just in the mainstream but in the alternative media. Um, this sort of it's started. People are starting to figure it out now that there's a lot of kabuki theater going on. But initially, maybe the first year of Trump's presidency, the the Q narrative, the Q talk, the idea that there's this secret plan involving Trump and a bunch of patriots and generals in the military and U.S. Marshals and so on and so forth, that they're going to they have a secret plan to arrest the globalists, and that everything that Trump does has a purpose in this goal, and Trump's going to deliberately cause a collapse in order to bring down the Federal Reserve and the bankers' power. This is, I would say, it's on par. The insanity of this is on par with some of the stuff that the social justice left is coming out with. Just the blind faith and all dismissal of evidence for the sake of this fantasy. And I understand why some people, including some journalists in the liberty movement, why they've you know attached themselves or coupled their reputations to this Q narrative. They want to believe, and I understand that they want to believe that there's someone out there, that there's a hero on a white horse out there fighting their battles for them, that they're going to be saved. And they've attached this fantasy to Donald Trump. And I think that really the Q narrative is a psyop. I think it's designed to keep liberty movement people on board with Trump, because really when the goal of the globalists with Trump, and the genius of using Trump, is that they can do everything they've wanted to do for over a decade or more. They can do everything and then just lay it right in the lap of Trump and conservatives by extension. That our ideology, what they call populism or nationalism, our ideology was the cause of this disaster. Not the globalists, not the bankers who created the bubble. It was us, right? Everything they've done for the past 10 years or more to set up this bubble, they need a scapegoat for that crash. And Trump is the perfect scapegoat, because they can do everything they wanted to do and they will get none of the blame, right? Historically, in the future, people will look back and say, look at what the evil nationalists did. Look at what these evil conservatives did. They almost collapsed the world, So this Trump's position in the White House is necessary for the globalists. They need him there. They need a scapegoat there. That's why they could not put Hillary in. A lot of people claim, well, Hillary would have been much worse. Well, Trump is much worse because if the economy collapses under Trump, we all get the blame. Any conservative, anybody who believes in sovereignty or nationalistic ideals, we're going to get the blame for that. Our entire ideology and our movement will be blamed for the collapse. This is why the globalists need Trump in the White House. The idea that Trump is playing some kind of 4D, 5D, 6D chess game, whatever, with the globalists while he has them in the White House 24/7 standing over his shoulder is absurd. It's complete insanity to believe this.
I would tend to agree with you. I would probably take it one step further. My opinion is that I think that in addition to being a psyop in and of itself, and some of the posts, and I'm talking about Q here, some of the posts prove that, like just some of the stances that they take on the official government doctrine about certain events that have happened. We don't need to go down there, but it's kind of a way of pacifying people who would otherwise be active and want to change for the better. I think that another thing that is similarly related to that would be also this hope that is placed in Russia and China that are going to somehow bring the world out of the currency crisis and, put the world back on a gold standard, or put the world back on a gold and silver standard. So when you look at China and Russia and you look at the globalist plan to take down the economy, how do you see China and Russia fitting in this? Do you think that is also a way to pacify the masses out of acting on their own? I'll let you take that how in whatever direction you want to take that, Brandon.
I've been writing about this for a long time now. The issue with, the amount of the sort of blind worship fervor that is going on in parts of the liberty movement with Trump was, a couple of years ago, that was happening with the East, and more specifically Russia and Putin. There's a lot of Putin worship going on that was, greatly misplaced. First of all, let's get China out of the way. China has been influenced by, specifically the Rockefeller family for over a century. They've been in that country influencing the politics and the development of government. They left briefly during the communist revolution, the war between the nationalists and the communists, and then came right back after the communists took power. So the Rockefellers have been there for decades. And, there's plenty of evidence to show that the Club of Rome has had influence over Chinese policies, specifically their one-child policy, some of their other environmental and governmental policies. China itself is, with their social credits, their new social credit system, their mass surveillance, they're sort of a perfect petri dish for what the globalists want for the entire world. So China is not going to fight against the New World Order or globalization. Secondly, beyond just their history and their behavior towards their own people, China is linked up with the IMF's SDR, special drawing rights, which is intended to become a sort of umbrella or basket currency system to replace the dollar once the dollar loses its world reserve status. China has been involved in this for quite some time. The Chinese government has openly called for the SDR to replace the dollar as the world reserve currency system. And China has called for the IMF to take global control of monetary policy. So China is not against the bankers. China is not against the central bankers. China is not against the globalists. They are with the globalists. On to Russia. As far as Russia and Putin are concerned, Putin has done the same thing. Putin has called for a global currency system under the IMF, and the Kremlin has called for the IMF to take global control of monetary policy. So Putin and the Kremlin are backing the IMF and the SDR, their global system, just like China has been doing. Also, Putin, since before he became president of Russia, he has had a long-time friendship with Henry Kissinger, and he even writes about the beginning of his friendship with Henry Kissinger and meeting Henry Kissinger in his biography of his early days before he became president. So the globalist influence is already there. The Kremlin admits Putin is longtime friends with Kissinger. He admits he's longtime friends with Kissinger. He has regular lunches with Kissinger. Kissinger has been on advisory councils for economics and politics in Russia. So he has been advising the Kremlin. Putin is not the savior of the liberty movement or of nationalists. Neither is China. This whole dynamic is what I call the false East-West paradigm. And it's designed to, I think, just like the false left-right paradigm, it's designed to keep people from taking action themselves. It's designed, just like Trump is designed, to keep us all sort of complacent because we all feel that someone else is out there fighting the globalists for us. When in reality, the only way that the globalists are going to be removed is by regular people standing up and fighting against them. They don't want that. They want us complacent, sitting doing nothing, while we're thinking that some hero on a white horse is going to come and save us.
And to me, it's frustrating, right? Because I look at it as the United States as far as a nation, as far as the economy and the politics go. I feel that the United States currently is the Titanic, and I feel that um, even if people are not aware that President Trump, which in my opinion is a puppet or deep state globalist or however you want to call him. It's like rallying around the captain of the Titanic, right? And I think the focus is better placed on, well, okay, we need to get to dry land and we need to work on rebuilding this, right? That's the step. It's not, because the captain's going down with the ship, right? We know how that ends. So one of the things that I've been thinking, so I would agree with you that he is the fall guy, and I think that there's a lot of misplaced hope and faith in this that he can turn the nation around when I think we've hit the iceberg hours ago. But that brings me to I had been thinking that, he was set to lose the election, but now I'm starting to think that, well, it really depends if the deep state globalists have been able to extract all of the wealth that they're able to extract from the American population first. And I thought that we were at that point with the Americans generally tapped out, so to say, as far as savings, as far as credit lines, and what have you. Now, my co-host on Silver Doctors Live, Mike, pointed out, well, not so fast. Assuming this money is still there is still trillions of dollars sitting in pension funds and retirement plans that the deep state globalists can siphon from the United States. And that got me thinking, well, there's a chance that if that plays out, then he might be a two-termer because there's still wealth that can be extracted. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about the 2020 election, and do you have any specific predictions? Have your predictions changed over the last year and a half? Take it from there, please.
Yeah, as far as Trump being possibly a two-term president, I still think that there's a chance of that. And the reason why I think that is not so much because I think the economy is going to that they're going to be able to float the economy for another year. I don't think that. I think that already, as far as fundamentals are concerned in the economy, everything is crashing right now. This is why, I hear a lot of people say, well, what are you talking about, a crash? The stock market is at all-time highs. Well, the stock market is not the economy. First of all, the stock market is a casino that's artificially manipulated by corporations through, stock buybacks and, in the past by the Fed. For now, what I see is sort of the last gasp of stock markets, similar to some of the spikes we saw during the Great Depression. Some of the biggest spikes in the stock market were during the Great Depression. So that didn't mean that the economy was doing better. It just meant that there was false hope in stock markets and equities that the system was going to get better. Just like today, there's false hope that the Fed is going to jump in and save the system through, QE4 and mass stimulus again, and that will somehow float things for another decade. And I don't think that's going to happen. Actually, I think that the Fed is going to let things crash. They already have, essentially. They've let fundamentals crash through their tightening policies. So we're already in the crash. In terms of Trump going on for another term, what I'm concerned about is that they may start a war. The war hawks in his cabinet, Pompeo, Bolton, others, seem dead set on starting a war with Iran or with somebody in the next year or so. I think Iran seems to be on the top of their list right now as the best potential source for a conflict. And as a distraction, a war would be a major distraction. And also it would help along the narrative that Trump and conservatives in general, we're warmongers, we collapsed the economy, we got America into yet another war that we could not win in the long run, that's going to drain our finances. So under a war president, I think there is a good chance for people to support Trump no matter what. This just seems to be the dynamic or the trend under war presidents, from Bush to Obama, um, whenever there's conflict going on somewhere in the world around the time of reelection, that always seems to come up. And hey, we don't want to replace a president uh, in the middle of a conflict. Now, of course, that's not to say that your vote matters. The banking elites will put in whoever they want to put in. Um, so but as far as the narrative and the rationalization for Trump getting in for a second term, they could say, well, there was a war and people like a war president. Americans love a war president, and that's what they'll say. Um, that's the scenario that I'm looking at possibly for 2020. However, it could go the other way, and Trump could be out in 2020. I'm thinking for now, it's more likely that Trump will be out in 2020. If the economic trend continues, as I see it continuing, into next year, and this downward spiral accelerates, then I think Trump would be out. But it could go either way.
Yes, and you're right. War destroys lives, destroys economies, it destroys nations, it destroys spirits. But it is also a racket, and there's going to be some deep state globalists that get even much more richer profiting from that, and that's sad and sick and twisted in and of itself. One of the things that I think about is when this collapse comes, what is it going to look like? And I'm thinking that it's just going to be a descent into, because I've been, deployed to Iraq under the army. I've lived in Mexico for a couple of years. I've been around the world, right? And I've seen, not necessarily, I've seen, hellholes, to put it frank, and I've seen developing nations, right, which we no longer call third world nations anymore. But, it's just like a daily grind. It's a daily struggle. It is always trying to just, maintain. It's not even about getting ahead. It's just trying to maintain. And I think that's what's coming to the United States, where it's just going to be a daily struggle for the vast majority of people. And there's just going to be that few, call it the 1% to bring out the cliche, but there's just going to be that few that are just raking in everything, in control of everything, owning everything, and then everybody else is just going to be struggling with basic subsistence living. How do you see this playing out? Do you see it in that way, or do you see something much more dramatic, something much less dramatic? How do you see this playing out?
I would actually agree with your assessment of how it will probably play out. And I've been saying for years that economic collapse is a process, not an event. And I've been saying that because it seems to me that a lot of people have been sort of conditioned by Hollywood and movies and television to think that a collapse is something that happens overnight. You wake up one morning and the zombies are running everything, and you're in a survival situation immediately, and you're running for your life. That's not historically how collapses happen. Collapses happen over years or decades, and it's this sort of slow, insidious process of draining away wealth from the common people and the public. It's this slow bleeding out of wealth of the public. And in the midst of that, there are surprise events and shock events that accelerate things, like we saw with the Great Depression and the crash of 29. And then there were multiple crashes early on in the Great Depression, and then multiple massive spikes in the stock market, things like that. And I think that a lot of people wrongly assume that's why they're focused so much on the stock market as some kind of indicator, because they wrongly assume that a crash is an event. It is not an event. It's a process that happens over years, and we've been in that process since at least 2008. We've been in the middle of a collapse. We never left the crash of 2008. We never left the Great Recession, what I would say is a depression. We never left that situation. And any indicator that you look at besides the ones that are heavily manipulated, such as employment and GDP and the stock market, any other indicator will show that that's what we're in. We're in a slow-moving collapse. Will there be a major event that people will say, "Oh, that's when the collapse happened. That's when it happened in 2019 on this day. That's when the maybe." I do believe that there will ultimately be a crash in stocks, and then at that point, but that will be when the globalists want it to happen, and it will of course be blamed on Trump and conservatives, but that's the insidious part of it. When that event occurs, everyone will look to that as the moment that the crash happened, instead of looking back for the past 10 years, or the presidents before Trump and the Federal Reserve and their influence over the bubble that they created that then led to that moment, that event. Nobody's going to look at that. They're all only going to look at that Black Monday or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Couple more questions before we wrap up today, Brandon. I personally believe that out of everything in the entire world, the globalists fear silver more than anything. In the last couple of weeks, my thoughts have been revolving around, has the cartel, so to say, which I call it, people call it by different names, have they lost control of the gold and silver markets? So that's what I've been focusing on. I think that they're losing control. I'm not sure if they have or not yet, but I'd like to ask you, what has been on your mind most the past week or the past couple weeks here, Brandon?
In terms of gold and silver?
In terms of gold and silver, in terms of politics or geopolitics, just what do you find concerning as we're moving in towards the end of July here?
Well, as far as gold and silver, I see the ETF, the paper-based control of that. I think that will fall away eventually, and I think the banking elites know that will fall away. That's why certain central banks are stockpiling gold. China, Russia, certain others are stockpiling gold. Why are they doing that? Well, probably because they know something we don't, or they know something that we suspect, but we can't verify yet. And that is that the U.S. dollar as world reserve currency is probably going to collapse soon. Or it will be dumped soon by China in the midst of this trade war, and that a bunch of other countries will follow their lead. And that will hugely affect the prices of gold and silver. So there's that. Also, in the midst of crisis, people are not going to be buying into the paper ETF markets in gold and silver as much. They're going to be looking for physical. And when you can't find physical anymore, the price is going to go up, no matter what the ETF market says or what the paper market says. So the bankers know this. That's why they've been stockpiling their own gold. In terms of other events that concern me, I did just write an article. I've noticed a very strange narrative in terms of the 2020 election, building up to the 2020 election, and that a lot of the major Democratic candidates seem to be, I don't know what the term would be, almost sublimating themselves to the four horsewomen of the apocalypse, AOC's squad of hardline far left, basically communists is the only term I could really use to describe them. And what I see in that is very strange. And then also Trump's weird sort of it's like almost a scripted battle between him and these junior politicians who shouldn't be getting any attention at all, but they're getting massive amounts of attention the past year. And that says to me, if I was writing this screenplay, if I was telling this story, if I was the globalist and I was writing this script and telling this story and this fantasy story, it would be that, after the failure of Trump, and the failure of conservatism and nationalism and sovereignty movements, the only solution that would, prevail over that calamity would be to bring in hardline socialism and globalism. That they're going to swoop in and save the world from the conservatives. And I see that in the seeds of that in this narrative with the squad or the horsewomen of the apocalypse. I see in maybe 5-10 years, I can see them being the chosen ones that are put into power down the road after the ashes have settled on the economic catastrophe, and after conservatives and Trump have been thoroughly lambasted and shamed, and I see that narrative building right now with them. The fact that they're getting so much attention in the media now, and from Trump and from senior Democratic politicians, concerns me. And I think that the goal of the globalists is to insert these types of people and their ideology as the prevailing ideology of American politics and society, maybe 5 to 10 years down the road.
Now, I have kind of a pessimistic outlook after the collapse, during the collapse, but you have an optimistic outlook, and you are hopeful that freedom and liberty will prevail, and that patriots will ultimately be successful in rebuilding and defeating the globalists. So in closing thoughts, could you just speak to that? Speak to how you think that the globalists are in fact defeated, can be defeated, and will be defeated. Could you close with that for us there, Brandon?
Right. I'm actually often wrongly labeled as a pessimist, and I think it's because I focus on the obvious realities of the situation, and I'm not going to sugarcoat anything for people to make them feel better about the struggle that's ahead. And there will be a struggle ahead of us to defeat the globalists. And the reason I believe the globalists can be defeated, first of all, I see this as maybe the first time in history where a large mass of people is aware of who they are and that they are behind a lot of these events. In the past, when there's been revolutions of the people or rebellions against tyranny or whatever, a lot of times it's against the political apparatus. But in that process, they forget to focus on the elites behind the curtain, or they weren't aware of the elites behind the curtain. So they maybe revolt, and then they change the political apparatus, but then the elites come right back in, and then they corrupt it, and you're right back to where you started. This time around, if there is a rebellion of the people, in the name of sovereignty and freedom, then I believe it is possible that we could focus that onto the true enemy, which is the globalists. It's not the apparatus, the political apparatus, or the government really, or even some of the ideologies. It's the people that are corrupting that system, the people behind it that are corrupting that system. If we could focus a rebellion against the globalists specifically, then we could change the world forever. Never before in the history of mankind have we had this kind of opportunity to remove a massive evil influence, something that has been around possibly for centuries. We have an opportunity now to remove that from the world. We just have to focus people at the right enemy. And not on each other, which is where the globalists want us to. What the globalists want us to do, they want us focused on fighting each other.
There you go. They can be defeated. The globalists can be defeated, and it's not about defeating the government. We're not saying that at all. We're saying we need to get the evil corruption out of the government. Brandon Smith, altmarket.com. It's alt-market.com. I'd like to thank you again for joining us today on Silver Doctors.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. I'd be happy to come back again.